So I'll let these be floating through the room. They're also out in the front as well. And I wanted to, first of all, orient you just a little bit to the building and to the university. Okay, this is the Malone Student Center, and we are on the ground level, which actually looks a little bit like a basement if you come from the other side. But there's a lovely coffee shop right adjacent, and I could talk about the politics and the economy of ordering coffee, but just rest assured that there is coffee available, but it will cost you just a little bit, but it's a student-run shop right there. And the bathrooms are sort of around and back, and you can find them easily. We have a generous schedule this morning in that we have a 3-hour period. We'll take a little bit of a break between each of the papers. And I know people don't really smoke anymore, but of course there's this beautiful outdoor patio where you can enjoy whatever, a little breath of fresh air. We have so many different things going on campus that we were given this as our space. And actually you all look very comfortable, so I'm hoping that you'll enjoy this. And I wanted to also, right from the beginning, to introduce all of the speakers. And I'm going to say a word or two as people are accustomed to getting to know each other's faces and hear from one another. And we don't have name tags, which is actually sort of okay, but maybe we will have name tags. Andrew just pointed out we could have name tags. It's not a bad idea. So I want to start, because she's standing with radiant color. This is Nishtila Devi, and she is a scholar of the Yoga Sutra and a teacher of the Yoga Sutra who studied, may I say, many years with Swami Satchidananda, and maintains a wellness practice, and her book is a book that really looks at women's experience of yoga, and that is a very, very important voice. The next person that I want to introduce is Tracy, if you could just sort of stand. Tracy Sachs is a graduate assistant in yoga studies. She is completing her Master of Arts in just a few weeks. She will be beginning the doctoral program in religion at UC Davis. And her background is in anthropology, and she studied at UCLA. And she's your go-to person with any particular special questions. And let's go back to Andrew, and Andrew, if you could stand up. And Andrew Nicholson is a professor of Asian Studies and Philosophy and originating a new MA program in Asian and Comparative Philosophy. What's the exact title then?
History of Philosophies East and West.
Yeah, History of Philosophy.
Joint program between philosophy and Asian Studies at Stony Brook University. If you know anyone?
Yeah, so all your East Coast friends, they have some amazing resources, and I was so happy. My wife and I graduated from Stony Brook decades ago, and we were the ones who petitioned for the teaching of Sanskrit back in 1977, and that's how it started. And then I actually taught at Stony Brook for 5 years before I came to LMU. So it's so nice to know that this legacy carries on. And Ian, if you could stand. Ian Witcher, University of Manitoba, wrote the book, The Integrity of the Yoga System. And he is a scholar out of Cambridge. I should mention that Andrew studied at University of Chicago, and Ian studied at Cambridge. And some years ago, gosh, it's almost 20 years ago, we did a similar conference on yoga topics that resulted in a really nice, what's the name of that book? Interpreting the Yoga Tradition that you edited?
Yoga the Indian Tradition.
Yoga the Indian Tradition, thank you, yeah. Okay, and Stephen Phillips, if you could stand, University of Texas in Austin.
No mistake.
And Stephen recently published a book on yoga traditions out of Columbia University Press. And he is a scholar of philosophy. He's in the philosophy department there. And where did you do your PhD?
At Harvard.
At Harvard. Okay, with Ingalls and those types of people, I trust. Yeah. And we're really glad that he's there. Stephanie, I'd like you to come up to the front. And this is Stephanie Carigliano. And Stephanie did her undergraduate work at Santa Cruz, did her MA in comparative theology. You can sit next to Andrew there. Here at Loyola Marymount University, and is in the last stages of writing her dissertation at Boston College. You can still stand up so they can see you. And the topic of her dissertation is the attitudes toward non-attachment in Jesuit tradition, as well as in the Bhagavad Gita and yoga traditions. Did I tell any lies?
I'm not covering Bhagavad Gita.
Okay, yeah. So I knew I'd be a little bit off, but Stephanie is an up-and-coming scholar. Nishtula had said, "Where are the women?" So Chris is going to be one of our chairs. So Chris, if you could stand up. He's homegrown and did his undergraduate degree here in accounting, did his master's in comparative theology here at LMU, and now he also is at UC Davis and going off to study Tamil this summer, and recently did sort of an amazing film with one of our other graduate students in yoga studies that is looking at the interface between indigenous spiritualities and environment through the prism of surfing in India. So, a lot of fun stuff. Okay, so this is Panditji Rajmani, and he is the head of the Himalayan Institute, successor to, one of the successors, a primary successor to Swami Rama of the Himalayas. I think many of us are quite familiar with his work and his writings. And Rajmani did his PhD at Pennsylvania, at the University of Pennsylvania, and just recently published a book on the first pada of the Yoga Sutra. And many of these books will be for sale here either later today or tomorrow. And I just met with the bookstore lady, and some of them are slow, but there should be many, including just about everybody's book who we've introduced already. So we're very happy to have you here. And Stuart Sabacher needs to come to the front of the room and take a chair behind Panditji. And you don't need to sit down quite yet. Stuart Sabacher is from Oregon State, and he found his way here, which is good. And he did his PhD at Wisconsin, and I remember meeting both him and Ian first at the American Academy of Religion when they were graduate students, and it was just so exciting to see them move forward into their lives and into their professional careers. And Stuart did his dissertation on different interpretations of samadhi, and has a new book coming out. We have many flyers for it from Farrar, Gerard, and Strauss. Right, yeah, famous publisher in New York City, and that will be out very, very soon. So you can sit. Great, thank you. And then Dan Rabe. And remind me where you did your PhD. In Tel Aviv and Jaipur. And he wrote a wonderful book on interpreting the Yoga Sutra, published by Continuum. And he came all the way from New York City, most recently, but all the way from Israel to be with us today. And Yohanan Grinshpan is also from, now are you in Jerusalem? Or
Jerusalem.
In Jerusalem.
The Hebrew.
Hebrew University of Jerusalem. And like Ian and myself and Andrew published with State University of New York Press, did a very wonderful book on taking seriously the concept of nirodha in yoga. And it's a book about death, and it's about really yoga preparing us for this ultimate unknown in some ways. So it's a wonderful read if you've not read it, and we're so glad that you took the trouble to be all the way here. Okay, Philip Moss. We first met in Helsinki when he was doing his dissertation, and he's painstakingly gone through the Vyasa commentary on Patanjali Sutra. And he's now at the University of Austria?
University of Vienna.
Of Vienna in Austria.
Yes.
So, and continues with good work. He will be our first speaker for today. And he will be talking on a different, well, not unrelated methodologically, but on the topic of asana, which I think will be very interesting. And then this is Dineshwar Timilsina. And again, I first met him in Santa Barbara, I think, was it? No, UCLA, somewhere, but many years ago. And he recently, I'm teaching the capstone course for our environmental studies majors, and he and his wife gave a lovely presentation. And he told the narrative of, and it reminded me of when I was a kid, but it was not quite as dramatic. But the first time I ever rode an escalator, I was 12 years old. Okay? And the first time I rode an elevator, I was 12 years old. And the first time I saw a neon sign, I was about 11 years old. So I'm a very rural sort of boy, but not as rural as Dineshwar. And he described their rhythm of life in Kathmandu, where in his village, it was pure Gandhian before there was even the word for Gandhian as we have in the Occupy movement today. But they made everything. They made their thread, they made their food, they made their oil. And in order for him to see an electric light at the age of 12, he had to walk 4, 5, 6 hours to a bus stop. More than that, okay, in Nepal, and then take a bus through all sorts of treacherous landscape. And there he was in the big city with electric lights. And it's so wonderful that he did that. And his father was the village pundit, and when his dad had done all that he could, he said, okay, you need to go learn more. And he established the Department of Sanskrit at Kathmandu University, trained the scholars of Nepal, and virtually anyone who has written on a topic related to Hatha Yoga or to Tantra has initially making pilgrimage to Nepal, but subsequently really using the resources that he contains. He did his Acharya degree at Banaras Hindu University. He did a PhD in Germany, and then thankfully came here, taught Hindi and Sanskrit at Washington University. He also taught at Santa Barbara, and now he's a tenured professor at San Diego State. And he spoke with our graduate students just a few weeks ago, and it was just so lovely and amazing. And I'm going to put a little bit of a plug in for a book that we're working on together that has been in process for almost 20 years. And it's on the Yoga Vasishta. It's called Engaged Emancipation, and we just got the cover from the press, and it's beautiful. I know, isn't it beautiful? Yeah. So we will be, yeah, just yesterday it came. And the book cover image, but the book is coming. It'll be available at the American Academy of Religion. He has 2 chapters. Arindan Chakrabarti, who I'll talk about, has 2 chapters. I have 2 chapters, as well as other scholars. So we'll hear in some of these papers about the Yoga Vasishta. Stephanie did her MA thesis on chapters from the Yoga Vasishta. Anna Funes, who I'll introduce in a minute, is currently working on Yoga Vasishta pranayama texts. And anyway, I'm just so glad that you're here. And let's see. Anna, you need to come up front. Okay, Anna is also one of our speakers. And her BA is in Vedanta from Mexico Autonomous University. Her MA is in Yoga Sutra traditions from also Autonomous University of Mexico, Mexico City. And she is writing her dissertation, many chapters are completed, at the University of Hawaii, the Department of Philosophy, in Comparative Philosophy. She's doing proprioception in yoga traditions. And she is the nation's, or I should say the continent's, only full-time professor of yoga studies. On our faculty after an exhaustive and exhausting world search for the best person, and she emerged. Now, is Kevin here?
Yes.
Okay, Kevin, please stand up. And Kevin is two people at once. You know about this.
At least.
Both in the Yoga Sutra and the Yoga Shastra, there is this city where you can occupy or at least carry the bodies of others. And he is carrying for Arindam Chakrabarti the insight into a philosophical aspect of yoga, yoga vasishta, yogacara. And will be speaking with us. He's doing his PhD also at the University of Hawaii, also with Arindam Chakrabarti, who is unable to be with us today. And tell us where you did your undergrad.
I studied at Berkeley,
At
at
Berkeley.
UC Berkeley, and I guess it was a sort of a strange split between Hubert Dreyfus and John Searle in terms of impressions made upon me. And then I pursued East-West kind of comparative philosophy at Hawaii, and I'm just starting to finish up this this dissertation that, as most of you know, hangs like a dead weight on our shoulders. So I'm almost there.
Okay.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Have I missed any? Okay, Vina is coming a little bit later. Daniel is coming a little bit later. So there are 4 chairs. I'd also like Lori Rubenstein to stand up. And Lori is our instructor of anatomy and physiology, overseer of our 1-unit class for undergraduates in the practice of yoga. And she holds a doctorate in physical therapy and also supervises our yoga therapy 4-year program in conjunction with Venice Family Clinic. And what I would like you to do is just get to know everybody that's here. And I'm going to put a little bit of a narrative to why yoga and why LMU, okay? And again, we have time this morning, so we're going to talk just a little bit more about what we've been up to. So, in the history of yoga, as we know, there was an important moment in the year 1896 here in Pasadena. And in 1896, fresh from multiple lecture tours, as was the style of the day worldwide, Swami Vivekananda sort of hunkered down in this now owned by the Vedanta Society home, and it's a museum. And with the assistance of his many helpers and working with transcriptions from the lectures that he gave, he wrote the book called Raja Yoga. And if you've read that book, you know he leans very heavily on translations that have been done of the Yoga Sutra. And we know that from that time forward, okay, Edwin Bryant. Is there any word on Edwin Bryant? Okay, if we could do something to try to find Edwin, that would be great. Any other people that you... Oh, Mikkel. Okay. Please stand, Mikkel. Okay. Mikkel Burley is professor of religion at the University of Leeds in England. He's done many studies of both Sankhya and yoga and Hatha yoga. And you did your studies at one of those universities, I don't know which one.
I did a PhD at the University of Bristol
Aha.
and a second PhD at the University of Leeds, where I now teach.
Oh, good. And what were your 2 topics?
The Bristol PhD was Sankhya and Yoga, and the Leeds PhD was conceptions of eternal life primarily in Western philosophical thought.
Wonderful. Wonderful. And what we have here, straight from the University of California Davis Library, is Classical Sankhya and Yoga in Indian Metaphysics of Experience. So all of the graduate students here have been studying Sankhya in some detail. So I urge you all to speak to Mikhail. So Edwin and Stephen, myself, and various others have taught it many times, have translated the Yoga Sutra. And if you have looked at the title of the conference carefully, you'll see it's Reading the Yoga Sutra, Translation, Interpretation. Now, how many syllables are in there? Just take a wild guess. Not 108, but it's a good guess. Not a factor of 100, it's a shloka. Okay, there's 32 syllables in the title. And what, of course, we're doing is being a little bit rogue in doing that because the Yoga Sutra is not in shlokas. But this text has a staying power that has really given a lot of energy over the years for many, many conversations, not unlike the conversation that we're going to have for the next couple of days. Now, here at LMU, which is obviously in Los Angeles, which is the city where Raja Yoga was written, yoga made its way here probably in the, well, we know in the 70s. And Rajneesh disciples used to run workshops here for the community outreach programs. And then the dance department, long before I arrived here in 1985, had been teaching dance, had been teaching yoga rather within the dance department. And then when I arrived with my PhD from Fordham University on the Yoga Vasishta in hand, shortly published thereafter, my job was to take care of, I was number 10 in the department, to take care of all those other people, meaning to teach all of the religions of the world. And I originated courses in Hinduism, Buddhism, and Islam, and religions of East Asia, Native American spirituality, and also, I always had to teach Judaism and Christianity as well. So I had a very big job. Academics know that in the day when universities such as this had 4-4 course load, remember my fourth year here, I had taught 1 out of every 5 students that passed along the stage. Okay? So it was awesome, and it was really busy. And then, remember, this is the 80s, and historically the 80s were not kind to spirituality. Some of my students have family members that had committed suicide in Jonestown. Some of my students were quickly becoming quite disillusioned with what they had wrapped themselves, or some of their family members had wrapped themselves up in. And I had a long history and background since high school of involvement with yoga and meditation. And it wasn't my job to be doing that, but it was part of my job to certainly talk about it. And then something happened, and it's called computers. And it's called people in the 90s who worked at GeoCities, which, again, we'd have to have a history conference for anyone under the age of 30 to know what GeoCities is. But this was really the birth of the internet, and it absorbed the time of so many thousands of people creating these websites, and they lost connection with their bodies. And in the 90s, a shift happened whereby a very physical form of yoga arose. A place was built called Yoga Works by 2 disciples of Pattabhi Jois. Another woman, very independent woman called Anna Forrest, opened a studio. Even before then, the Shivananda people, some of whom are here in the room today, had begun the teaching and dissemination of ideas and practices of yoga. And the Shivananda Center, continued through the 70s and the 80s. But then in the 90s, which is when I started attending there regularly, the classes were all really, really crowded. And some of these folks sort of found me. And I began to offer public lectures and invite speakers in from India and elsewhere. And then in 1996, I started a study group where people from the Vedanta Society, from the Yogananda community, which again I could talk at length about Yogananda as well, who started teaching yoga here in Los Angeles in the 1920s. If you're an out-of-towner and you're lingering on Sunday, you might want to visit the Self-Realization Fellowship Shrine. And we have people from the Kashmir Shaiva group devoted to Swami Lakshman Ju, to Guru Mai, to Ahmadji, to disciples of Mr. Iyengar, disciples of Deshikachar and Krishnamacharya. Okay, so we all gathered every third Wednesday night in my house for 5 years. And we went through every single Yoga Sutra, chanting the Sanskrit, looking at different translations, looking at the commentaries. And we ended, it must have been about September 8th, 2001. And Chris was an undergraduate with me that very same semester. And what happened on September 11th? Okay, the world changed. And our group had, in the subsequent 3 weeks, so it was toward the end of September, we were quite unsettled for a variety of reasons. But out of that group had surfaced some very, very serious scholar practitioners, including John Casey, who had just earned his PhD from the University of Hawaii, Carol Rossi, who then taught yoga regularly through our dance department here for 9 years. And we put together a certificate program called Yoga Philosophy in service of the need of the many hundreds of people now teaching yoga in Los Angeles. And it was around that time that the LA Yoga magazine came to be. And I had, even while we were convening the study group, gone to the university and said, you know, we could really maybe open a graduate degree in yoga. And they just looked at me like I was from Mars, right? But I went back again in 2001 and I said, you know, I really think this could serve people. But they said, but not as a degree. And because I've been here so long, they said, well, why don't you do certificates through extension? And it was brilliant, and we started, and we've educated and certificated hundreds and hundreds of people, probably in the thousands now, in various aspects of yoga. The first yoga philosophy certificate was followed quickly thereafter by a 60-hour training, now a 200-hour training in Vinyasa Krama. And Srivatsa Ramaswamy, who is the only surviving senior teacher, directed and instructed himself by Krishnamacharya. He was under Krishnamacharya's supervision for 30 years in Chennai, teaching to the dance school, the Balasarasvati school in Chennai. He taught all of the Bharatanatyam dancers there yoga, and he's in residence with us every summer for more than 10 years. And he teaches over 700 asanas, he teaches chanting, he teaches pranayama, he teaches the texts. I mean, he is a living treasure. And then we started a certificate in yoga and ecology in conjunction with a now defunct nonprofit called the Green Yoga Association, which is now, that certificate is now morphed into one that Tracy supervises in yoga, mindfulness, and social change. 1 weekend a month for the course of a year, really interesting, diverse curriculum. Then we also have a Yoga and the Healing Sciences with Dr. Eden Goldman and Tara Gold. And out of that, or actually a little bit before that, we originated a 4-year yoga therapy certification. So 1 weekend a month for 4 years. People train first in sort of how the human body works, using Western terminology, and then they learn about subtle body and asana in relation to particular maladies. Then they get supervision over how to approach people with difficulty, and then they're placed the 4th year in this clinic. And this has allowed many folks to emerge as yoga therapists, working in conjunction with offices of chiropractic as well as medical offices, And it's been just so heartwarming. And I'll just tell one small story. It's actually Lori's story to tell. But there was this one client who came in, and most of our clients are only Spanish language clients, indigent. And her husband had died. She was quite overweight. And she was disconsolate over the death of her husband. And she'd been coming to the clinic, coming to the clinic, coming to the clinic, and she suffered from extremely high blood pressure. And she just sat with the yoga therapist and wept and said, I'm alone, my husband is gone, I'm just going to die, someone will find my body. And it was a very, very sad situation. And sure enough, her blood pressure, what were the numbers on her blood pressure originally?
It was something like 220 over 90.
Okay, 220 over 90. I mean, all of us, even non-medical people, know this is not good. Okay, she was really sick. And one session, largely pranayama. They brought in the cuff, and the nurse thought it was broken. Because for the first time, this woman's blood pressure was normal. And it's not that she's free of sadness, but she's sustained the practice, and she is a happier person and a healthier person. So I just wanted to give a little bit of a testimonial that regardless of all the ridiculous things that get attached to yoga and all the narratives that we could tell, it's still an effective way of making people a little bit more whole. So as all of these programs are going along, and I'm like busy doing all sorts of different things, the university then comes to me and says, you know, those yoga programs, they're sort of, why don't you think about a graduate program? And I said, wow, that's a great idea. And then, of course, it took 4 or 5 years for the approvals to come, but this May we are graduating the first class, Master of Arts in Yoga Studies, many of them in the room here today. And we also have in the room today many second year, or rather second cohort students that will graduate a year hence. We're currently building our class for the following year, and I'll just make a very quick summary of the curriculum, that it is multivalent, and that the students study Sanskrit for 3 semesters. The students have a 3-course sequence in anatomy and physiology and hatha yoga, and in learning about all the schools of modern postural yoga, a little bit of the meditation. They have a 5-semester sequence in foundations of yoga as a methodology, Indian philosophy, Buddhist philosophy, Jain philosophy, and spirituality, which we engage in India. Then they do a course in comparative mysticism, sort of seeing where yoga fits in with all of the world traditions as a spiritual practice. Then the students take a comprehensive exam in February, in their second year. And I just returned a few days ago from New York City, and Covenant House, which is the nation's, really probably the world's largest provider of interim housing for 18 to 21-year-olds, invited us to come. And we just completed a 6-week residency, 6 graduate students and myself, sort of a little bit, and then we overlapped with one another. But 6 weeks, every day, 6 hours of yoga and meditation in this homeless facility. It was amazing, and some of the students will incorporate that into their final project. Other final projects are on a whole range of diverse topics. And then people ask me, well, what do people do with this degree? And I say, I don't know, but I'll be able to tell you in a few months hence. And we're not alone now. University of Venice has a master's in yoga, as does SOAS at the University of London. And the programs are a little bit different, but you can just ask any of us if you want to know more about the program. Okay, so I was sharing with my morning companions, with Chris and with Ian, that I'm a little bit more nervous about this conference than I have been since the first conference I organized, which was at Stony Brook in 1981. And there's so much at stake with this going well. And as with that conference, which included Shabbat Arya, who's now Swami Veda, and Jared Larson, who wishes he could be here, but he's not feeling well, and my own professor, the late John Chetty-Matum, the philosopher Antonio de Nicolas, the physicist-philosopher Patrick Heelan. It was just the Jungian yoga comparativist, John Borelli. It was really a wonderful event. Jerry Trucchetto talking about music and yoga. But what we're doing now is really working with state-of-the-art scholarship that did not exist those years ago. And what we're hoping is to really have a conversation amongst the scholars and a conversation that invites all of the folks that are within the room here today. So let me give a little bit more on logistics, and then we'll get started with Philip's talk. So the logistics here, the bathrooms are sort of around the other side. You can go out these doors if you need to. One of them, I think they all go outside or out these doors. If you get really thirsty, or if on one of our breaks you really want to queue up, there's a coffee shop right there. We're going to break for lunch at noon. The speakers will, and the chairs will be going up to the third floor for lunch. If you want to get something here, you can either go to the cafe here, or there's a full service cafeteria upstairs so that you can get some food. And then we'll reconvene here around 1 o'clock for another 3-hour session. And then we will reconvene again. We'll go to about 4:30 or so today. And then we're going to reconvene again at University Hall at 7:30. The speakers will have dinner together, also in University Hall. But at 7:30, everyone is invited to a lecture by Andrea Jane. And Andrea, I think, is arriving later today. Is that correct? She had a different schedule. And were you able to find Edwin? Okay. So what will happen is that we'll have an endowed lecture on Jain Yoga and Swami Vivekananda's Yoga this evening. And that will start at 7:30 at the Macintosh Center. It's all on the sheet that you have. Then tomorrow we will be in a different room, a larger room. There will be more people because it's Saturday. And that room is Seaver 200, which is across the way a little bit. And again, you'll be on your own for lunch. The speakers will have lunch together. And then you're all invited to the Yoga Vedanta, Shivananda Yoga Vedanta Center in Marina del Rey for a concert at, is it? 8 o'clock tomorrow night. So lecture tonight at 7:30, concert tomorrow offsite at the Shivananda Center. Kirtan, it's a kirtan with the Temple Bhajan Band, which is just a great local talent. And we're all going to be having dinner at Mayur, the speakers, and you're welcome to jump in on that also. But it's a big restaurant. So, did I forget anything? Does anybody have any pressing questions? Okay. So, I would like to invite Philip to come forward. We have a presentation. Okay. Can you tell me? And would you like to stand? Yeah.
Any way you could do it from that corner to the block?
Am I blocking you?
Yeah, a lot of people are blocking.
Oh, okay.
The space will not be.
Let me.
I started school here.
Yeah, I'd like to invite the speaker.